All right, let's jump straight in. Talents and strengths. This is going to be an introduction to strength-based development. First off, 3 questions. Have you taken your CliftonStrengths assessment from the GallupStrengthsCenter.com? Are you familiar with your top 5 strengths, or themes they're called also? And have you read through your personal Gallup Strengths report? If not, not a worry. But if you have, then you're going to be able to have a good sense of where we're going to go in this video. But this can also work as an introduction if you're just about to take these assessments. Okay, talents versus strengths. So there's some interesting things that we first need to kind of get an understanding of. What's the difference between a strength and a talent? But we're going to back up even further than that, because first I want to address a common misunderstanding around development. So a lot of the time we're thinking around development in this old framework, and that is overcoming our weaknesses. So if you look at this guy, this is commonly what we think of when we're thinking of becoming better, developing ourselves. I must avoid failure. That's the rhetoric that we think of. If we want to get better at something, well then, let's find the things that we're not good at and make sure that we're better than we were before. So we focus on individual hindrances, the things that are stopping us, preventing us from being able to take the next step, go further. So we're trying to overcome our weaknesses. Now, there's a lot wrong with that, and we're going to go into it, but a strength-based approach is very, very different. It is saying, where can I be outstanding? And it focuses on natural potential. Now, if you look at all the people who've made history, all the people who've really made a dent in the world, none of them have been doing it by trying to overcome their weaknesses. They've all done it through becoming outstanding in a very specific way. They haven't been all-rounders. They've been outstanding and very niche in a very specific way. The reason why we get stuck in this rut of thinking about development as overcoming weaknesses is because it's the way we've been taught. From when we were very young, a school system is all about, well, let's concentrate on making sure that you get better at maths because you're really bad at maths. Or let's make sure you can pass all the exams. That's the basic requirement for you to be able to go into the next level, the next grade. Our whole system, our whole education system, very much the way we've been brought up, is around this overcoming weaknesses rather than actually growing strengths. This is why we have this conventional approach towards personal development. So as we move from a school setting, an institution, we get into adulthood and we go through life and we think, okay, we want to self-development, personal development. We want to get into that. We usually fall again into this conventional approach, which is maintain your strengths. Let's make sure that I stay good at what I'm good at. And let's work on fixing the weaknesses. So there's a very poor assumptions being made here. Okay, it means one assumption is you can learn most, if not all, behaviors to a level of excellence. Now that's just plain wrong. Another poor assumption, if you try hard enough, you can master anything. Now, we've probably all heard someone say something along those lines to us, or we've said something like that to someone else. The reality is it's just not true. Fixing weaknesses leads to success. That's another very poor assumption. So we get stuck in this loop of we identify improvements needed. We then move straight into developer improvement plan. And that moves back to, okay, well, we found another place where we need to improve. Goes back into let's make a goal and create a plan and try and improve. We go round in this sort of loop where we've never taken the time to actually say, well, maybe I'm designed in a very specific way, and maybe there's a specific way for me to be able to get better. And maybe I don't need to just follow the patterns and processes that this other person or this other group has laid out in front of me. This is where talents come in. And this is where I wanted to make a big difference between the word strength and talent. A strength is something that's already been worked on. A talent is something that is natural and innate. And this comes from a natural way of thinking, feeling, or behaving. And much of the time, it's through neural patterns that have been formed in our brains from when we were as young as 4 or 5. Those have created a pathway for us to be able to get celebration, get happiness, get joy. And so we do more of that. And that has created an investment. It's an investment of time. It's an investment of knowledge. It's an investment of developing skills. That investment with your natural talent, that's what later becomes a strength. The ability to deliver consistent, near-perfect performance in a specific task. That's what a strength is. So you can see the difference between a talent and a strength. Now, the CliftonStrengths is poorly named in that regard. And so it's actually more specifically identifying areas and themes of talents that allows you to pinpoint more accurately the investments that you're going to put into those talents so that they become strengths. So let's try and make even more clarity between, we'll find an example to try and define what is the difference between a skill or between knowledge and a talent, because we can get quite confused by these. And we're going to use an example of basketball. A grasp of basic rules of the game of basketball. Is that a talent? Is that knowledge? Or is it skill? Well, it's knowledge, right? Because it's got to do with basic rules. Anyone can learn basic rules. Therefore, it's not a talent, it's knowledge. An innate desire to outperform the competition. Is that a talent? Is it knowledge? Or is it a skill? Now, this is where some people might get confused. They might identify it as a skill, but in actual fact, this word innate desire, it's a talent. So when you partner innate desires for the necessary outcome, which is a competition, i.e. to win, with knowledge and skill, you get success, you get strength. So this last one, the ability to perform the basic steps of dribbling a basketball. So that's skill. Now you might say, okay, well, this guy's got natural talent at basketball, and we often confuse skill and talent. But the actual innate desire to compete, in this case, was the talent. You match that with then the skill of the dribbling and being able to go through the natural steps of what makes basketball really successful. Then with the knowledge of the rules, so you're within the boundaries of the actual game, that's where you get someone who's got a real strength of being able to perform in a basketball game. And so you can see the secret sauce of it all coming together. Let's look at it in a different context. Now, this is where the natural place to be, or the desired place, I should say, to be, is in the center when we have developed strengths. So it's the coming together of talents, skills, and knowledge. Now, let's see if you're lacking any one of these, right? It leads to a negative. It leads to something which is not desirable. So let's leave out the talent. So you've got knowledge and you've got skill, right? But you don't actually have the natural innate talent for this particular role, right? Well, then it's possible that it can work for a season. In other words, it's fleeting, it's seasonal. So maybe you're able to do it for a week or even 3 or 4 years, but eventually it's going to lead to burnout because you didn't have that natural talent to really apply that knowledge and that specific skill. So it didn't end up becoming a strength. It was fleeting and it led to burnout. Let's remove skill. Well, if you've got natural talent and you've got knowledge, but you haven't applied it and you haven't gained skill, well, then it's immature and underachievement, right? So, and that's obvious, right? You've got natural talent. Okay, you've got a lot of knowledge, but you haven't applied the skill, the 10,000 hours, as they say. Well, then it's going to be immature. Now, let's take away knowledge. You've got some skill, you've got the talent, but you're not playing by the rules. You haven't actually gained the knowledge that is so important. Well, then you're ignorant, right? And it leads to irrelevancy. So you can see how you take away any one of these aspects in a role that you're called to or the job that you're doing, and you don't end up with strength. You may just end up with a mixture of the two, and it will eventually end up in a negative. So the actual equation is a mature strength is equal to the ability to provide consistent near perfect performance in a specific activity with energy and sustainability. This is the key thing, energy. If there's one thing in life that is the most valuable, it's energy. And then to be able to sustain energy over the long term. That's what really brings us strength. So the beautiful thing about a strength, when it's actually a strength, and that is the applied area of natural talent mixed with skills, mixed with the right knowledge that you should have. When you get those three combined, you get a mature strength over time. And that is the magic of where you get to wake up in the morning and you say some things like, I can't believe I get to do this. Because it brings energy. It doesn't deplete you. You could do it all day, every day. You'll have sustainability and you'll have energy. It actually brings you energy. It doesn't take away energy. It's a beautiful place to be. So that's where we want to be. Here's some stats from Gallup. People who get to do what they do best every day, in other words, operating in their strengths, are 6 times as likely to be engaged in their jobs. Right? So engagement is huge. Again, it's to do with that desire for energy. You're 6 times as likely to strongly agree that they have the opportunity to do what they do best every day. 3 times as likely to report having an excellent quality of life. Isn't that amazing? That's the backdrop. Now let's look into the actual elements of the CliftonStrengths assessment itself. So there are 5 things to know about the CliftonStrengths assessment. Okay, it's grounded in more than 5 decades of research. It measures the presence of talent in 34 general areas, and they call it themes. It is designed to help you develop your talents into strengths, so we've covered a lot of that. It gives you a language. This is so powerful. It gives you a language to talk about your talents with others. The strength assessment now gives you kind of themes, areas to talk about. You could talk about focus. You could talk about communication. You could talk about adaptability. All of these are some of the themes in the Strength Finder assessment. That gives you language to be able to communicate with those you work with. It helps people identify their unique contributions. It's broken down into 4 different domains, and they are executing themes. So these are themes of talent, of executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. So those are the 4 different domains. The best way to be able to go through your CliftonStrengths report, and if you're working with me or if you're working with another coach, to work through really inputting your strengths into your life, the best way to do it, it's a little corny, a little cheesy, but name it, claim it, and aim it. So the first thing is you want to really understand, what is this particular theme talking about? What does it mean? So context, for example, is one of the themes. Well, what does it mean to have a natural talent for context? So you need to unpack it. Sometimes it's not as intuitive as the word, like focus or communication. So understand what these themes are and identify those themes and their meaning to you personally. And after that, you can kind of sit back and you can think, can I really sit under this banner of this particular word? You might have developer and empathy. Are you happy with being called and having a talent of empathy, or being empathetic, or being a developer? What does that even mean? So can we actually claim that? So it's gaining the awareness and acceptance of that talent. Remember, this is a tool, so you don't have to sit with it all, but can you claim it? And until you've been able to understand it, name it, and therefore claim it, you can't aim it. So the next step, the third step, is to aim those talents into the specific areas of your life that you want to aim it. So it might be in an area of fathering, for example. And you want to be a strength-based father. You want to be a father who's really specifically fathering through your own design. The best way to do it is name those different strengths, claim them, and then try and think through, how am I going to actually aim these strengths into the way in which I design my fathering approach? How I'm going to actually father my kids and show up as a father. It's a really great idea to kind of think through that and think through your talents and your strengths and ask yourself the question, how am I going to aim it at that specific part of my life? Now, there are some interesting things around the way in which strengths can kind of manifest. So there are 4 areas or 4 types. Now, there may be many more, but I'm just going to highlight 4 different ways in which strengths can manifest. The first one is what we're all going for, and that is a healthy strength. So the way that a healthy strength manifests itself is in good self-awareness and awareness of others. You have skills, knowledge, and experience that has been applied from the talent. There is a conscious and constant use of these strengths that benefits everyone, not just yourself. So that's where we're heading. That's where we're going for with a healthy strength. Hidden or underutilized strength. Now, it's very possible that 1 or 2 of the strengths that show up in your top 15 or even maybe in your top 5 is somewhat bewildering. It's somewhat strange. And you think, I don't really feel like this is me. It could be that this is actually a hidden strength. It's a part of you that has never really been realized. It's never really come to the surface. You don't actually have this awareness that this can actually be you. Now, it could be a really powerful strength, but for whatever reason, it's just never been utilized. You've never drawn on it. It could have been pushed down because of the culture you grew up in, and it never really celebrated that part of you. Maybe there's an element of shame or rejection with that part of who you are. There could be many, many different reasons for that, but it could be hidden or underutilized. Now, this is the opposite of that, overused strengths. Also has low self-awareness, and it's a strength which is just being used for the pure dopamine rush, right? And this actually tends to hurt others. The strength is very loud or aggressive or pretty, it feels harsh. It doesn't really match with the rest of the person. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's a strong, loud, as in physically loud and domineering strength. It could be even something like empathy, but it's kind of out of whack. It's always self-imposing and self-celebrating, if you like. Others will tend to disengage with this part of who you are. When this shows up, people kind of tend to back away, and it's off-putting. So that's a way in which a strength can sometimes manifest. And then lastly, the last one I'm going to mention here is a counterfeit strength. And this is interesting because sometimes we grow up and we are in environments that are very, very different from an actual environment where we're authentically celebrated as who we are. And when that happens, we begin to kind of recognize and see, depending on our personality, we might look around and think, well, this type of characteristic is really celebrated and embraced in this community or this culture or this family or this workplace, whatever it might be. And so therefore you pretend, you kind of borrow someone else's strength, if you like, and you put on this counterfeit. Now, the thing about this is that people can see through it. Or eventually it gets so exhausting and so tiring that you have to remove the mask. So this never ever lasts forever, but it can be a way in which strengths kind of manifest and show up, where you can think, oh, this person's such and such. But in actual fact, it's something which they're sort of putting on so they can get a certain response. So there are many different ways in which strengths manifest, but in all, we're going for a healthy strength. That's where we're aiming. 4 leadership styles. Now, strengths can manifest in 4 different ways with leadership as well. And we're just going to look at this very, very briefly. One thing I will note, just in context to leadership, I sometimes get asked, what's the perfect sort of matrix of strengths to be a great leader? Well, there isn't such a thing. You can be a fantastic leader with any matrix of strengths. It's all about how you, going back to the whole name, claim, and aim, it's how you aim those strengths and how you bring them into flourishing, how you bring them into your workplace and into your roles. That's what really creates dynamic people, and people are attracted to dynamic people, and therefore dynamic people have leadership. If your top 10 or your top 5 are specifically in one of these categories, one of these domains, well, then you'll have, generally speaking, you'll lead in that style. So relationship building, leadership style is people-orientated leadership. They'll lead through building chemistry with other people relationally, and they'll lead that way. If you tend to be an executing themes in your top 10, then your leadership style will be process-orientated leadership. If it's strategic thinking, then your leadership style will be thought-orientated leadership. If it's influencing, it'll be impact-orientated leadership. So you can see that depending on your matrix of strengths and your makeup of different themes that you have in your strength set, you'll tend to lean towards one of these 4 different styles, if you like, of leadership. So the last thing I want to mention in this introduction is the difference between raw and mature. Now, the thing about CliftonStrengths themes is that they are neutral. They are neither positive or negative, but they can be raw or mature. So let's look at this a little bit. A raw strength is basically a strength that hasn't gone through the process of that development of building knowledge and skills with the natural talent. So it's an unapplied natural talent, and therefore it's still in its raw form. And that actually can come across sometimes as not necessarily negative, but it's definitely not helpful. I'll give you a quick example. You might have the communication talent, but in its raw form, it comes across as lying or exaggerating, would be an example of raw communication talent. Because it's all about the need of the other person's response to you getting across a message. The getting across the message, which is more important than what the message does when it gets over the other side. Now, that's just an illustration of communication. Another one would be, say, empathy. Now, empathy in its raw form will be very, very conscious of what other people say and feel and how that impacts their feelings and emotions, and they won't be able to control the difference between what you might feel with great emotion and the feelings of someone else and your response to those feelings. So a raw talent can be a difficult thing to manage, and it does sometimes need a third party to come in and help. It needs a coach, or it needs a friend, it needs a good parent to be able to develop a raw talent into something which is a mature strength. Mature, on the other hand, is something where, again, it's what that definition of we've looked at. It's something that brings you energy and is sustainable over the long term. If we think of an example of a banana, right? A raw banana, when it's green, it's still a banana. But is it useful? Is it nice? Is it tasty? Is it enjoyable? Have you ever tasted a raw banana? It makes your mouth stick to the roof of your tongue, or it makes your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth. It's not an enjoyable experience, and therefore, just like that, someone with a raw strength doesn't give off an enjoyable experience. But mature, on the other hand, it's flavorful, it's tasty. And in the same way, a mature strength gives off a tasty environment to those around them. So that's it for the introduction to a strength-based approach to personal development. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.